Okay, hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of First Bite. Today, you have me, Erin, and I'm really excited for our guest today. I've been wanting to have her on for a while. I've been following her journey on Instagram, specifically with advocacy, which is something that we need in so many realms now. It is not lost on First Bite that the world feels really heavy right now. And I think it can be hard sometimes because you feel like you want to do everything, but then there's a lot of, me specifically, I feel like I want to do everything, but then it you feel like you're doing nothing. And so I think I wanted to bring Colleen on to talk on what are things that we can do from an advocacy perspective and really get her perspective specifically with IEPs. So, for those of you that don't know, Colleen Ashford is the owner of Ashford Speech and Advocacy PC, a mobile and virtual private practice based in Southern California that provides evaluations, treatments, consultations, and advocacy at IEP meetings. After graduating from the University of Illinois with her bachelor's and Illinois State University with her master's, she began her SLP career in a public elementary school with a bilingual education program and became focused on improving her Spanish so she could better serve her students and their families. Love then brought her to Southern California, where she began working in multidisciplinary clinics with OTs and PTs, from whom she learned so much about sensory and motor development that informs her approach today. Now working in her private practice, Colleen's area of focus includes AAC, autism, childhood apraxia of speech, and parent coaching and early intervention. She is passionate about providing culturally responsive early intervention services with the Spanish-speaking population she serves in her own neighborhood. Always an advocate at her core and now in title, Colleen equips all the parents she serves with information on their educational rights and how to navigate the world of special education. And through her account, theadvocate.slp on Instagram, she is also bringing a deeper knowledge of special education law and policy to SLPs and teachers too. Check out her podcast, Unfiltered IEPs, coming summer 2025 for real talk about the world of special education, which I'm really excited about. I think it's very, very needed. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Erin. I'm so excited to be on.
I know that everyone's, heard your bio because I just read it. But can you tell us a little bit more about, or if there's anything you want to add about your journey in regard to, because I think it's really amazing the niches that we find ourselves in our field. And I feel like advocacy, especially for special education, IEP, and early intervention, is something that like we all do to an extent, and we should be doing. But like you're bringing it this information, making it a big part of what you do in your practice, I think is so amazing and so something that other SLPs should be really modeling as well.
Thank you. I think if I was to just sum up like my journey and how I got here, in terms of adding advocacy really formally to what I do, I would say it was a really slow burn because in my first role in my CF here, I was in public schools and I actually loved it. I loved my first district. I was there for 2 years. I had a super supportive team, a super supportive special education director, and had my husband not got a job in Southern California, I wonder if I'd still be there. Honestly, I'd still
Mhm.
be a school SLP. But once I came out here and I jumped into the clinic world, it became really clear to me how many parents that I was seeing in the clinic, I was seeing their children in a different setting, how much they really did not know about their own parent rights, the IEP process, what they could ask for, um, that you could even have more than one meeting a year, just basic stuff. And I got really interested in making like resources and handouts for those families because
Mhm.
I kind of felt like I had this insider knowledge of how the schools worked that a lot of other SLPs or OTs at the clinic didn't have. They, went into the private practice world right away, and that was what they knew. And so I felt like, wow, just even having that school experience was an asset. Um, and after I, had several years in private practice, I was like, I kind of want to go back to schools. I kind of want to just see how they are out here in California or how a different district would be. And if I want to stick with that, or there was always this little feeling of like, okay, I could keep helping parents in this behind the scenes advocacy, educational kind of way. And so it really was kind of an experiment for me to go spend one more year in the schools to determine like, is that something I want to do, or do I want to um, help from kind of the outside of that structure or institution? And
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, that experience led me to the decision to open my own practice and make advocacy a big part of it.
Yeah. I love hearing people's stories of like how they get, because there's always like, I think a lot of it is about taking this, like being open to what the opportunities are and what the need is. And I know that like being in private practice myself, I work with so many families that like getting into school is like so stressful for them, and there's so much anxiety around it, and there's so much fear, and like I can do the best that I can, but I see 30 patients a week, and so it's really hard to have all of that time to focus on that coaching advocacy piece, um, within the frame of also treating that child for an hour. But I'm curious, like, what are some of the reasons that families will work with you or hire you as their advocate, um, in your practice?
Yeah. So for some of them, they are brand new to the whole like experience of going even into the preschool realm of things.
Mhm.
And that's really early to get an advocate, but the clinic I came from most recently, I have a great relationship with, and some of those therapists just referred families to me who are like,
Mhm.
this family just doesn't know kind of what to expect or what the process is. And so sometimes I'm not going into the IEP meetings, but we're just having a virtual consultation so I
Yeah.
can like explain their parent rights to them, explain how it's going to go, and just help them feel less alone and like somebody's got their back a little bit. Um, and then another big time that families seek me out would be a kindergarten transition. So the child had early intervention, then they were in the preschool program, and now we've got a transition. It's kindergarten. Sometimes with general education being considered, um, versus like what we call in California a special day class, what a lot of other parts of the country call self-contained. And this is a big decision because while we know that IEPs can change at any time due to the needs of the learner, the reality is this is a time when kids get kind of tracked. And so this decision being made at 5 is big deal. Another one is a triennial evaluation or any reevaluation coming up. If parents are in disagreement with their child's placement or the amount of minutes or their eligibility, and they feel like something's not right and where their child's needs aren't being met, but they're not quite sure how to navigate the system. They're like, I don't know the words to say because they'll say to me what's going on, and I'm like,
Oh.
oh, you need to ask for specifically this. And they're like, see, I never knew that was even an acronym. So a
Mhm.
lot of times they know what they're looking for, but there is a language that you have to use and a process you have to follow to get needs met or get requests adhered to with the school system. Just going and saying to the teacher, do you think we should look at potentially occupational therapy is not the request you think it is. Nobody's
Mhm.
gonna start an evaluation because you kind of brought it up. Um, but parents are so appreciative of their school teams and all that their teachers do for them that they a lot of times don't want to be seen as like difficult. They really like they tell me that I don't want to be the difficult parent. I don't want to be the parent who they dread talking to, but I also need to
Yeah.
advocate for my kid, and they feel really stuck. So I think people appreciate working with me in particular in that sense because they know I've been there. And so the way I talk to the team with, that little bit of like, oh my gosh, I get it. Like, you don't have to give us this IEP until the meeting's over. It's so stressful when somebody watches you type an IEP, right? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, I
Yeah.
get it. I get it.
Mhm. Yeah, even the term like parents' rights. right? Like even just saying you have these rights, you have, these are things that you deserve to recognize, or like that should be accommodated with the right support. Like I think of the example of Michelle and I always talk about, like when our families go to a doctor's appointment or a referral that we've made, like we will literally text them, like, these are the things to ask the doctor. This is the language to use. Because unfortunately, like you said, if you're not using the correct terminology or the right language, the message might be missed. Like we might not be really on the same page of what you're actually asking for. And B, that there might be a specific way you have to ask for it because of all the legalities and all the systems and the processes that have to happen in order for things to be written and established a certain way in the school system. And so for a lot of caregivers, but that I get the same pushback where it's like, man, I don't want to switch doctors because I don't want to upset them, because I was taught that you're supposed to listen and this is the person that's in charge and they're supposed to be, telling you all the right things. And so sometimes when I have families I work with where it's like, maybe we should get a second opinion, there is a lot of like, I don't want to make anyone upset. And so having somebody like you that can advocate for that and really validate the way that they're feeling, I'm sure is really, really helpful. But in terms of those, like, I'm sure there are a lot of times where what your client wants and what the school is offering or agreeing to are not the same thing. And how do you navigate those conversations? How do you, that I'm sure are very, very difficult, supporting your client while also helping them understand why this might be happening or what their options might be that aren't exactly what they're asking for?
Yeah. I think a lot of that comes down to educating parents on the process, and understanding that in order for changes to be made, they have to have the data to back it up. The present levels drive the goals, which drive the minutes, and all of that equals like placement, right? And so if the parent is really seeing something, um, like there's a meltdown every morning before they get to school, but the school isn't seeing it and it's not been documented in the IEP, and that area has never been evaluated, like social emotional has never been an area of evaluation. The school can't just add counseling services. So helping the parent understand, like, I know that it's so frustrating because right now you just want a solution, but legally they have to follow a process that requires data collection, potentially an evaluation as part of that data collection, and then a team decision on what is the next best step to support this learner. And so really helping parents to really get like, it's we have to do A to get to B. Is an important part of the process, and also getting them to understand, like, you're a member of the team, right? You get a vote, and if kind of everybody gets a vote, we're looking for a consensus here. Your opinion is just as important as anyone else on that team. They're all experts in their areas, but you're an expert in your child, and everything needs to be discussed in the context of those team meetings. Having conversations about specific kinds of sports with just the general education teacher in the pickup line is not part of the IEP process. And so that's another thing I'm trying to help them understand is, like, if you want it documented, if you want it formalized, if you want to get the ball rolling, you got to call a meeting. It's got to be done in the formal way in order to move forward. So it's a lot of education. And then also, sometimes they're reality checks,
Mm-hmm.
and as an SLP who's also an advocate, I can give my opinion on the speech and language results. Sometimes we're really pushing for, like, really think they need to continue speech because they still have that frontal lisp or something. And I'm then the person who's explaining, but it has to have an educational impact. I hear it too, and I see that reflected in the results, but this is how eligibility works in the schools. So again, I guess that's education, but Sometimes it's like it's diffusing the situation just by explaining really neutrally the process, and then
Hmm.
also the eligibility criteria.
Yeah.
And then we have situations where the school is, we're in disagreement with their results or we're in disagreement with their recommendations. And that's when we go through our procedural safeguards and we determine what's the next best step um, to take in terms of getting at that second opinion, which you can
Yeah.
get in the school system through an IEE, or calling another meeting and just continuing to like have conversation. It can go a variety of different ways, and it
Yeah.
has gone all those ways this year.
Yeah, when you and this kind of goes into more what we're going to talk about too with like a family's individual differences and things that you have to take into account, but when I'm just curious when you meet a family because I'm sure the way you have conversations is based off of your knowledge of that family's educational literacy, of that family's like um I don't know if I don't know if there's a different term like from social determinants of health included from like an educational perspective. What is kind of the process that you use or what are things you really take into account when you meet a family to think about like, okay, what do I need to know about you to best serve you as an advocate, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Um, Great question. I think one of my first questions like you know, is this your first child who has an IEP or has been through the system? Because a parent who's got an
Mhm.
older child who's like gone through this has their own set of experiences, which sometimes can also be biases. Um, but also knowledge and information about how this works, right?
Yeah.
So whether or not it's their first rodeo or not is important. And then also whether or not the parents themselves went through the US educational system or whether they went to school in a different country, which is true for several of my clients. Because that means we're not just learning the special education system, but we're new to kind of the whole education system in the US, especially if this is their first child and they're young. There's a lot to go over and a lot to learn, and I end up doing a lot of that in my early intervention sessions. Um, I try to really prep parents for that transition to the
Mhm.
preschool program or IEP process, should they qualify, and
Yeah.
also clear that like we don't know for sure if they will or not, kind of thing. But here's what it'll look like potentially if they do, because yeah, for some of my families, it is this whole education system is brand new to them. So those two things are really important. Uh, yeah, I mean, and whether or not they're an English
Mhm.
language speaker or reader, some of my families don't also have like super high literacy even in Spanish. So
Yep.
sometimes we're doing like voice memos, back and forth.
Mhm.
So yeah, all those things are definitely important.
Yeah, and how so I think for a lot of people, like thinking about advocacy services, especially as something that's like not direct therapy that we think of that like this is what speech pathologists do. There's so much more that we can do, obviously, as we're talking about today. But I feel like most people think that's, typically middle to high SES status, being able to afford this extra this extra support. How do you make this accessible for families who may be lower income, who may speak primarily Spanish? And why is it so important to have that advocacy to understand what their rights are when their children are going into the school system?
Yeah. I got this question the other day on Instagram, like this exact question. And
Uh-huh.
it said, some of the families find out about my services or utilize my services because they have older children and I am seeing their younger child in early intervention. And I'm never like selling myself in that
Yeah.
situation because that's inappropriate. But they have my business card and it's right in the name, right? So they know what I do. Um, and I can offer like sliding scale, and I do, or discount. But I also can offer payment plans, and I do that as well. So like a family who had two kids work with me, or this whole year, two of their children, time. We had two-hour long meetings right at the end of the year. That's a lot. And they're just going to pay me off over the whole summer. Like,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what we can do. And I am really passionate about being able to provide this kind of service to that community because I think um, it has the potential to hopefully change in the culture in some of the schools around me that, how do I put this? The culture sometimes, or the pervasive idea that the families don't know any better, and so they don't have to dot their I's and cross their T's as much. I mean, and that's a controversial thing to say. People can get upset with that, but I've been there, right? I've been in a school district right around here where that was absolutely the case. There were corners cut when folks knew that the family didn't know their rights. And then there were also situations where families who had higher SES and higher educational literacy and all those things, and maybe brought in a family member who also was a healthcare provider or something. Like we didn't see a lot of advocates, but like advocates who were related. The term used out here, at least, is like they're a high profile parent. And so there's this connotation of like, oh, you better like sit up straight and like better dot your I's and cross your T's and make sure you wrote your short-term objectives, or something might get questioned rather than the parent who is not super aware of their rights, nodding and smiling and saying, thank you so much, thank you so much. I want to change that culture around here. I want schools to expect that even if that parent only speaks Spanish, an advocate might still show up. And so we're going to do our best for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you show up to the meetings, you're as an advocate for the family, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. I've been to IEP meetings as like a floor time advocate because I do specifically floor time training too. Obvious also as a speech pathologist, like helping with the support, but wearing two different hats. And I think some people aren't aware that like this what you educate parents on, like you can have more people being there in the meeting to support you and being a
Exactly.
part of that as well.
Yeah, you can, it doesn't have to be a paid advocate. If your sister is a nurse, she might know, just a little bit more, or have a different question to ask, or just simply be able to be somebody who's a step back emotionally from being the parent of that child. I had a mom who is a special education, or no, she's not special education. Sorry. A mom who is a lawyer who took the same special education advocacy law course that I took. We like the
Mm-hmm.
professors I took it from literally are her colleagues.
Wow.
Used my services this year. And I was intimidated a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
she was like, I just need somebody who is not who's not mom. I need to be mom. It's emotional for me. I get a little bit worked up and then I don't say exactly what I want to say. You just have the perspective of somebody who's been there and knows the questions to ask, and that's what I need. And so, from someone has very little knowledge of even the US education system to someone who is a lawyer themselves, like I think there are probably points in every parent of a child in special education's journey when they could just use somebody beside them at the table.
Yeah. Her co-regulator and her like, yeah. Wow. That's awesome. Yeah, and going off of like the expectations of parents and caregivers too, I just think it's always wild to me in any setting the way that people view the way that parents interact or respond or act in with so many assumptions, and so many preconceived notions and so much judgment, as opposed to taking the time to understanding where they're coming from, when also that's our job as speech pathologists, is to really, we're pediatric speech pathologists, to work and support that child but also that caregiver, and we don't give caregivers as much grace. I had somebody recently say something about someone they were working with, just made some comment about a caregiver like not caring or not trying or something. And I was like, respectfully, I never start with that assumption or judgment. I believe that caregivers are doing the best that they can with the support and the resources that they have. And you don't know where they are in their journey of processing all of this information, of who's told them what, of, how many times they've been told no or anything like that. And so meeting that caregiver where they're at and just like you said, validating, hearing where they're coming from can build that relationship and make them feel so much more supported. And so just like that mom who's a lawyer, like having her somebody to bounce those things off of, I'm sure was incredibly valuable. So she didn't have to feel like she was the only one fighting in that frame of reference.
I'm sure that I really still want to listen to your episode where you guys talk about like feeding in the schools and things, because I'm sure that is a huge area of stress for the parents of the kids you work with, because we
Mm-hmm.
have this like prevailing idea that like this just isn't a thing schools do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and parents are like, oh my gosh, but they're there 6, 7 hours a day and they have to eat. So like what's gonna happen and who's gonna support them? And then you've got like the school SLPs or nurse or psych, whoever's like, oh my gosh, we cannot do one more thing.
Right.
And to acknowledge both of these things. And I think that's like an example of like the problem overall, right?
Right.
Why I want to, what I want to talk about on my podcast is like,
How do we
I don't want us to be in conflict with each other when what we should all be doing is holding our law and policy makers accountable for not giving us enough funding to
right.
do all the things we need to do to support
Right.
students with special education.
Yeah. And like kind of going off of that, because I think, we can't be talking about what we're talking about without addressing things that are current within what's going on in our world. And being bilingual, I know you've shared a lot on social media that some of the families receiving your early intervention services have mixed immigration status, and are seeing the impact of what's happening with our current administration efforts to ramp up ICE enforcement on them specifically,
Mm-hmm.
which is, if this episode will come out probably in like 3 weeks, but this will, I'm sure, still be a topic of conversation because this is what's happening. And this is, something that we need to be aware of. And Michelle and I are big proponents that like what we do as a field is inherently political because things that happen in politics are impacting our families and not we can't put our head down and pretend that what's happening isn't happening, especially, and I won't go too off topic, but like as a trauma informed clinician, at when a family is experiencing trauma or fear or not feeling safe, there's not much else. You doing great therapy isn't going to matter. And that's just like the truth. So your family's experiencing this. I'm sure this is something that you really have to think about and talk with them. Can you talk about the impacts that you're seeing, how EI providers can be, culturally responsive, trauma informed to care for these families? Because like I said, like safety is number one. And like so in trauma informed care, safety is number one in being able to learn. Safety is number one in being able to really do anything in our lives. And so if our families aren't feeling safe, like anything we can do to help support that and make them feel safer is a part of our job.
Yeah,
So how do you do that?
I completely
And
agree with
I can't imagine, sorry, I just, I can't imagine sitting with them and feeling that and like having those conversations and like the I'm gonna cry too. Um but this is what's happening, and it's hard to watch it and it's hard to not feel numb. So like thank you for all that you're doing. Sorry. Um but we have to do something.
you.
So take a minute if you need to.
I
We can
still,
also
yeah, it is hard. And I feel the pressure of like, I'm just still not doing enough. And there's like all these like resources I need to make and I need to share. And I am also trying to like focus on the families in front of me because my main responsibility is to them. Um, but yeah, it was a conversation. I mean, even weeks back, but especially now, making sure everybody has access and knowledge of the how to get the notifications from local groups that are uh, reporting on raids and reporting on stops along the road. Facebook groups, like, and all the parents are like sharing with me as well. So like I'm just like this network of information between all of them, and that's hard too because sometimes I feel when they've said that, if I see something, say something, right? Like you want these notifications, right? So if I know that something's happening in and around our neighborhood, if someone's gotten detained, then they want to know. And I'm like messaging in the middle of the week, right? Like it's not sometimes at night, like, and then I feel like I'm spreading fear, but like also they have to know like this is their safety, right? So it's making the communication like demand a lot more. It's making the vigilance demand a lot more. I'm on my phone constantly. And they are too, especially when they have a spouse who's driving, and you never know where ICE is going to be that day. So it's literally taking all of us to like report and keep each other safe. Um, so that's one thing. Another is sharing resources for the worst case scenario and being brave enough to have those conversations about what happens if they are detained. Do they have a plan for their child? The Immigrant Law Resource Center, ILRC, has a family preparedness packet in both languages that includes like a checklist of documents they should have. And in California, we have child care affidavit form, which would only be filled out by someone who was willing to take care of that child and bring them to school after the fact. So it's nothing you do ahead of time. It's an after the fact paper here. So a lot of things like be getting in order. There's, if you have a sheet of pro bono, or what's the word, non-for-profit lawyers in your area, you can be sharing that. But like, so with so many of these things, everything I've almost mentioned so far besides the family preparedness packet, like it's so regional, it's so like local that like I can't share something that's going to help every SLP help their families. Like you have to do the research on what local organizations can help the families you serve.
Yeah.
We've gotten not a lot from our regional center, which in California is like the purveyor of early intervention services. I think we have 17 of them. So, but I did just get an email. Sorry.
Okay.
Got an email that the Department of Homeland Security has gotten the CMS information. So Medicaid information was given from several states, or taken from several states, including California. And we don't know what this means yet. I just got that email. So the whole gist of it was like protect each other, keep each other safe. Like Gavin Newsom opposes this, but people are going to be scared to sign up. People are going to be scared to get referred for services, to even go to the doctor, to even go out right now. And I'm really concerned about school. These kids, aging out of early intervention, getting qualified for a preschool program here, their parents might not want to send them. They might not want to make that drive and take that risk. So have that conversation too, and tell parents, like, you have to make the choice that's best for you. There are ways you can support your child at home. Like, preschool is not required. Parents don't always even know that, especially if they're not from the United States. In California, compulsory education starts at 6, right? But kindergarten's not even required. Again, it's different in every state. Like, preschool is never required. So they can get the evaluation, they can get the information, they can qualify, and communicate that to parents. They don't always know. you can go get that evaluation through the school district, and then you can still decide that you don't want to send them. That's okay. You have to make the choice that's best for your family, especially if they're not providing transportation. And that doesn't mean, also, this is another important thing to say, doesn't mean they can't get special education if you want them to start next year. You can always request an evaluation. You can, always um, re-enroll them in the future. Like, saying no now doesn't mean it's a no forever. People don't know that. So, like, talking through resources and options is really important. I'm sorry, I feel like I've been babbling a long time, but
No.
one more thing to say on that, like being trauma informed, as early intervention providers, we have to be really sensitive to this because we are knocking on the door. Like, we are coming to the door. And so those reminder texts right beforehand
Mm.
they're a pain, but they're going to be a kindness because you don't know somebody's very like amygdala response, like fear reaction when they hear a knock on the door now. Knock on the door in a polite way, announce yourself. Buenos dias, like, like, so that it's an immediate, hopefully, like, okay, it's Miss Colleen, right? And then telling the kids this summer, we're not opening the door. Wait for an adult to open the door. Because as soon as you open the door, you've allowed people in. And what if it's not me? So that's really important, number one. And number two, I've learned this, like, especially over this past week, like, I'm not asking people, how are you doing? They're doing bad. Like, they're not okay.
Mhm.
Um, I can be asking really much more like specific questions. Are you hearing your child saying anything new?
Mhm.
What's something he did this week that made him happy? Um, are there any resources that like you're looking for that I can help you find? Those kind of questions. But
Mhm.
I've learned myself, ¿Cómo estás? No, we're not doing that.
Mhm.
Because how? Like, they feel like, sometimes I think like, oh, I don't want to put it on her. And that's how most families are going to feel, especially if you're white and you're not part of the immigrant community. They're not going to
Right.
bring it to you. They don't know if you're a safe person until you bring it up and you say that you will support
Mhm.
them, that you say you will keep their information safe.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, until you say to them, like, I'm not in here, I don't need to know your legal status, but if you would like this family preparedness plan, I have a packet for you. If it's not relevant to your family, maybe you can pass it on to a neighbor. Like, that's how I put it. Because and they don't have to feel like they're disclosing something to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. Because I know that it's like very emotional. And those are your, like, the thing. And I've been in and out of early intervention, but I've done early intervention for most of my career. I've done home health to some extent for most of my career. I'm still, only 7 years in, which makes me feel like still very new, but I guess it's,
We've been
um,
talking like the same,
yeah,
almost the same amount of time.
yeah. But when you do early intervention home health, like you become family. Like there's a different level of relationship that happens when families let you into their home. And I started in Columbia, South Carolina, and there was like, a lot of diversity in Columbia, South Carolina. And I would go into homes and I would go into neighborhoods and like I knew that I had to earn trust. Like trust is not given. I knew that as the white woman coming in, they didn't they didn't owe me anything right away. They don't owe, there's nothing. And so early on, I had to learn, like, check my own ego, feelings, emotions, because these families, there is fear, there is mistrust in the medical system and the educational system and the political system, all of the above. And it takes time to build that. And then when you do build that, like there's a really strong community.
Mhm.
Um, and that I think is the biggest thing in small and big forms, that like truly community is what saves people in all ways, shape, or form. And so when you go into a neighborhood, when you are a part of a neighborhood, when you go into a home and someone lets you be a part of that, like you are a part of that community, and like that is not to be taken lightly, and that is not to be I find that there's a lot of beauty in that, even in all of the like horrible, hard things that are going on that are happening. And so, like Colleen said, like keep all of that in mind in how you engage with people and families at any point in time, be
Mm,
trauma informed, but especially now. And those such subtle things, like you said, of sending a reminder text, of like how you acknowledge something, of how you bring something up, of like, you know, and now too, you know, you have to think your goals are going to be different than maybe they would be in a different scenario. Like what your like I love how you said like what is something that like made them happy. Like you're probably going to be focusing on different things because they need joy. Like maybe I'm not going to give them anything to do this week in regard to speech therapy other than like, you know, be there with your family and like, you know, I'm going to work with your child and you know, these are some things we worked on, but like do not feel like you have to like this is a homework assignment or this is something, but like there I think there's that perspective shift, and understanding what trauma informed actually means, I think helps clinicians not feel like, well, I didn't do speech therapy today. And when you really understand what that means, you recognize like you there's so much foundation
yeah.
to communication that like is beyond did I get them to say this word or do this thing.
And I've backed off of like, I'm very much like a parent coaching model person. But right now, sometimes what the parent needs to do is to make a phone call to their lawyer or to like whoever, and that's okay because that the foundation, like you said, like safety is the foundation of everything we build upon. And so again, like you said, like reserving that judgment, not being judgmental of like, oh, mom was really, she was on the phone for our session today. She really is supposed to be participating. She might have really needed to be making that phone call, and you were the what you did today to support was you still provided therapy to the child, and she did something to help keep her family safe. Um, yeah, I think that's the best like thing, and that the SLPs can do is just exercise that empathy and try to reserve the judgment because things are going to fall through the cracks. Like even school SLPs, like when school year starts, like papers might not be returned or, you know, phone calls might not always be answered or returned quickly. Like, and that can feel frustrating because we're all exhausted and people in those positions are overworked as well. But like you said, everybody's doing the best they can with what they have, and they probably have a little less to give now. Um, I want to acknowledge SLPs who aren't in my like privileged position though to like work for myself and to make the full amount per hour that the state pays for early intervention so that I only see 18 kids a week and then do advocacy and
Mhm.
you know some other things, but that's how many early intervention clients I see a week, and I know there are people out there who see more, or people are in a private clinic who see many more kids than that, and it can feel like, oh my goodness, empathy overload, like I cannot care to this extent like about everybody and everything and help, and that's okay. Like
Mhm.
so like a resource passed out to everybody is an easy way to do it. Giving yourself grace and by extension giving them grace. You're going to like it's natural to want to like shut off and to like numb out because we care so much like
Mhm.
inherently with what we are and who we are and what we do. But this is so much. And for those of you who have like 30 to 70 kids that you serve, I just acknowledge that it's so much more. It's just multiplied. Um, Partly, I got into private practice partly because I can't not just go 100%. And I knew I couldn't do it. I also couldn't do it for 50, 60 kids anymore. Like if I'm going to be who I am and do what I do, I can do it for 20. And that's just honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that kind of like, goes into what we were planning on talking about too, with like how those settings impact your relationships, like how parent and provider relationships are going to be different depending on the setting that they're in. And I think I've never worked in a school system, but I've worked in different settings. But you, having worked in EI, clinic, private practice, and school, have like experienced the whole spectrum of like what those relationships can look like. Can you speak to that a little bit more as well?
Um, I think that, I mean, going back into like the advocacy realm, I think that the lack of interaction school SLPs get to have with their families sometimes makes them then like the object of like frustration for the parent, because especially if they've been through EI and or they're currently getting outpatient therapy and they get this really bespoke like one-on-one, I get to talk to you every single time relationship. Then they see the school SLP as like, oh, they don't talk to me, I've never heard from them all year. And I'm like, yeah, that's because they have like 75 kids. Like, so I'm trying to be an advocate for the school SLP on my side of like, I've been there. It's really hard. Um, and if you reach out first, I bet they reach back out to you. Um, they're not trying to be evasive. They are just overworked, quite
Mm-hmm.
frankly. And so I definitely want to be somebody who's like spreading awareness that we all have the same degree, that we are all equally qualified, that we are all um, like professionals who, we have those same letters and the same degree. So that parents understand like it's a limitation of the setting, not a limitation of the professional. Um, that can be hard. It can be hard when they're used to like the one-on-one.
Yeah. I get really frustrated. And I'm sure I've had my moments where, I've more so probably with like physicians, love them, but more so probably with physicians where I've like, been honest with a caregiver and said like maybe we need to kind of seek a second opinion or something like that. But I try to be very, if there's a miscommunication or maybe there's like it seems like a differing opinion between providers, to not put the parent in the middle, because
Mm-hmm.
that's really hard on them, and to try and reach out and have the conversation as the speech pathologist to the other speech pathologist so we can get on the same page, because that caregiver and parent is already having to make so many decisions, and me being the private practice therapist, like I do have more time. So well, more time with the family. I wouldn't, I'm pretty booked, but I have a little bit more time to reach out to them and say, hey, this is what I've had the conversation with the caregiver. I may have a different, more insight from what the caregiver is thinking and why, and then be able to translate that to the school therapist and have those conversations. And so I love what you're saying too about like, we, it's probably very easy to say, yeah, you know, we're working on this, they're not working on that, like you're right, that's frustrating, but really saying, hey, here's their perspective, here's what's happening, this is probably why this is happening, and advocate for each other too. I think, in general, I think our field has a lot of really supportive people, but I think we can get lost in the weeds a little bit. And at the end of the day, most of us usually have the same overarching goal. We just have to
Mm-hmm.
find a similar way to get there.
Mm-hmm. And I'll tell them too, like, having been on the inside of that, I always say to parents, like, especially if there's some contention, right? I'm like, there's probably more people who agree with you, like on that at that table than you're aware of. But because of politics, because those people may not feel comfortable speaking up in front of their boss, their program specialist, and disagreeing with them, you're not going to know that like they also think this child needs X, Y, or Z um, all the time. I've worked with some amazing SLPs on like the other side of the table this year, um, who clearly articulated like their recommendations and why they thought something. Um, and sometimes like they were in like agreement with the parent, but it was almost like how we have to ask the question. They sometimes can't say, I think, like what they really would recommend, um, unless it's asked in like a pointed way. Like they have to kind of be like alley-ooped in order to help advocate because the politics are the politics. And having been in the school just last year, even like the school administrators have a different set of priorities. Absolutely, they care about the kids. They wouldn't have got there without caring about the kids, but they're also caring about a budget and how resources are spread and expended. And they because of that, they're considering it all when they're at the table, not necessarily just the kid.
Right. Right. And, our scope of practice looks different in different settings,
Mm-hmm.
which is also important to think about. Like my scope of practice in the children's hospital was different than my scope of practice in the private practice, which is different than the scope of practice of a school speech therapist. And I'm sure you get those conversations too, where like the parent will be like, well, why aren't they doing this in the school if you're doing it here in private practice? And so like, how do you help them understand that? Because then, we have the conversation too, like we have the same scope and the same degree, but like why am I getting different services or different levels of that in two different settings?
Yeah. Um, well, insurance is so fun as well. Having their own requirements. Somebody asked me the other day, "Do you advocate to insurance companies who have denied kids?" And I was like, "No," but that's an interesting question. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think the provider would be the best one to advocate for that. But interesting. Um, I made a handout for this that's specific to California, but it talks about the distinction between like the medical model and how you qualify for services in the medical model versus eligibility for SLI in particular in schools. And in California, um, for receptive expressive language delay, you have to be at or below the 7th percentile on 2 or more tests. Different from Illinois. Like it was really clinical judgment in Illinois. Um, Now, it's not the case in articulation. That's not the case in pragmatics, but interestingly, it is for receptive expressive language. And then medical model, right? It's sometimes you need a physician referral, and that's all you need. Of course, a speech pathologist should do an evaluation after that. But sometimes the insurance company, all they really wanted to hear was the physician said yes. They're not necessarily reading that report. And so we can qualify, or at least this was the case for me in my clinic, like maybe that child has an 85
Mm-hmm.
in like a standard score in receptive and expressive language, and they're qualifying. So a lot of times this conversation isn't necessarily about a certain treatment approach, at least for in my experience, it's about the eligibility. It's about qualifying. And it's those kids between like 77 and 85 standard score on language tests that parents are like, why aren't they getting it in school?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's outside forces that add pressure to this, right? Because we do not have universal health care, because outpatient services cost families money, that puts extra pressure and directs ire towards schools who are just following the eligibility criteria because now the family goes, I was counting on that. And now we're probably still paying several $1,000s a year for speech therapy. So we have to remember like that outside systemic
Mm-hmm.
force that is basically like creating more kindling for the fire of frustration of parents between and parents and schools. These are like the big
Yeah.
things where I'm like let's zoom out and remember like who the real bad guy is.
Mm-hmm.
Either of you.
I in and I'm sure it's different by state, but in California, do schools request their medical insurance as well through the school?
No, no, no.
We
It's
so in
asking
South Carolina, schools will ask for Medicaid and they will bill Medicaid as
yes,
well. Yeah.
Medicaid, but
Yes, yeah. But
that's
not like okay.
nothing else. No, just Medicaid.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um I
And
had
that's not to say I don't think like a student couldn't get Medicaid, use
right,
Medicaid to still get outside services. It's just a
right,
reimbursement model like for the schools.
right.
Yeah.
Um, I had a question that I lost, but it will come back around at some
I
point when
also
my
thought that
ADHD. Huh?
I said I also had a thought that I lost because I'm like, did I even answer that question?
No, you did. You did. I think yeah, I think it's just a lot of that. Oh, I think this is also where, like you said, every state is different. And so it's important for speech pathologists in each state to know their organizations and resources where they can get these support from. And I will say your state organization, is someplace you can go hopefully to receive some of this information. I know in South Carolina, Skisha has a lot of resources. Kelly Caldwell, who is phenomenal, who does a lot of our advocacy from a state level piece. Like I reach out to her about something. She's like, let me do this. Let me talk to our lobbyist. I know not every state organization has a lobbyist. And if you, don't know if your state organization has a lobbyist, it's important to find out.
Hmm.
Some states can't afford lobbyists because we don't need to pay dues for a state organization, but there is so much value to that because those are the organizations that can enact a lot of change on like a state level.
Mhm.
A lot of nonprofits, like there, I remember when I started working in South Carolina, I was like, there's so many organizations that like I had no idea existed. So like, how are my family supposed to know that
Right.
these
I still
organizations
feel like that
exist?
all the time, especially because I've only lived in California 6 years. Like, I don't know. And I didn't grow up here. Like, there's so
Right.
much. We have a
Ask.
great assistive technology lending program.
Uh-huh.
Um, and yeah, that's something I've been utilizing definitely in EI.
Mm-hmm.
Give families like a trial
Yeah.
of different applications and they have, I mean, many different devices. We haven't done anything but like a dynamic screen display for who I've trialed it with, but they have switches. They have so many different great things, and um,
Right.
you have to know about these things. It's hard though, and that's the beautiful thing about social media, though. You can find out a lot there.
Yeah.
These organizations, but also, yeah, your state organization.
Mm-hmm. I we're probably gonna go a little over today, and that's totally fine. I just if you have time,
That's fine.
because I know we want to talk a little bit about speaking of states being different, how like that 3 to 5 support pre-K can be confusing. It can look different in different states, districts. How does that impact students and families? We kind of talked about that, how like it can really impact when they get to that 5 year and they're going into the school and they have these expectations. But like, yeah, how has it impacted them, and then how do you support them in that way? I know that's a big part of the
Yeah.
advocacy piece.
Well, because we don't have universal preschool, not every child who is entitled to special education services through an IEP is necessarily going to get or is entitled access to their general education peers. Um, and so some programs, some districts around me have really better built out like whole preschool programs that include general education students. And so there's integration, for lack of a better word, like from the start. And then some districts like are only serving students who have IEPs 3 to 5. And some of them have a model where some of the students are getting like 2 day a week preschool, which is like all SAI minutes besides their therapy, specialized academic instruction. Um, and some are getting 4 days a week, specialized academic instruction, and they're kind of like corralling them into these lanes. So when I talk about like these kids are getting tracked in kindergarten, it's actually starting before that, at least here. Again, I get so many comments that are like, that's not it, how it is for me. Fantastic. I love that. I'm just talking about my experience. This district I worked in previously, we did a preschool evaluation for them, and then we decided whether it was a very teeny tiny district, so literally just 2 classes, AM or PM. That itself was a track because the kids who were in the AM class were higher support needs than the kids in the PM class. And most of the time, the recommendation then became the kids in the AM class were in a special day class, and the kids in the PM class did this more integrated model. That means we're tracking kids at 3. That's a problem. So because we do not have preschool for all, or universal preschool, and we have so many different programs and it looks so different, not just state to state, but district to district, districts next door to each other. We are setting a standard of like almost segregation from age 3 because all states have to do is like that bare minimum. There are some states where they're not even doing a preschool like at all. Like they're just coming in for their itinerant services, like kind of how they did in the I, but like at the school building. So it can look so different. And there's a lot of military families where I live. Some of them like are getting like the whole kit and caboodle here, and then they moved to Mississippi. I think, don't quote me, but I think that's where they moved. And like we're given almost nothing. Like the same IEP was interpreted to be like, we don't have those resources. We don't have that kind of a program. You're going to get your 45 minutes of speech and your 20 minutes of OT and every week, and that's it. So like completely different depending where you go, what district you're in, and families may move somewhere and think, like most of the time they're looking at great schools ratings and they're like, this is a great district. That doesn't necessarily mean anything about their special education or the preschool program they're offering. So they turn 3 and they're like blindsided by the lack of resources or lack of support.
How do you keep track of all of it?
I looked it all up for all around me and then I wrote it all down and made a handout. But like that's what I'm saying. Like I haven't put it a lot out there because like so many of my handouts are super local.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so what would you say to, or do you have any advice for an SLP who like wants to consider advocacy or like be an advocate more like on the inside of the school system? Because like you said, I mean, it's not, you have amazing support for the community that you're in, but like there's a need everywhere else in different systems.
Yeah. I agree, and I think we need more SLPs like to be advocates or do advocacy like even on the side. I think if we made advocacy more available to everybody, not only like I think would more parents participate more meaningfully and know their rights, but also it wouldn't be such this like oh an advocate's coming like when you're in the schools because that's like how it is. Everybody stresses out. And I just want to be an advocate where like they're like eventually like, oh, it's her. Okay, it's gonna be fine. Like that's the goal. Um, your SLP Dej has a side biz SLP course that I was a speaker on, talking about advocacy as like an addition to a business you already have or something you do after your 9 to 5. Um, and Ashley Barlow has a great course. It's called ABC, which is like advocacy business concepts. So there, and I will say I'm affiliates for both of those courses to put that
Mhm.
out there. There are resources out there, but yeah, like this is pretty niche. And you want to make sure you really do have like a strong understanding of special education law to go along with like your school experience when you consider getting into something like this. For me, for 8 years, I just went to my really good friend's daughter's meetings. Like I was in the schools or in the clinic, and I would participate virtually. Um, she lived in Indiana, but like that was what lit my spark. And so if there's somebody you care about in your life who has an IP but is like not your client, um, see if you can tag along, and go to a couple unpaid because it really does change your whole perspective when you sit kind of on the other side of the table and you feel from that parent who you know and care about the anxiety and the like heightened level of emotion. It changes everything. I think most advocates are parents who have been through the process themselves and become very passionate about advocating for others. And then a few are like child free people like me who have seen the school system from the inside and know that parents deserve to know their rights a little better and participate more meaningfully.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
I
Thank you so much
really
for having me.
appreciate everything you're doing. We'll have to have you back because I feel like there will always be more things to talk about. But also, we mentioned some of it, but tell everybody where they can find you, what you have going on. Also, Michelle and I love to do a like, if anybody's, as her grandma would say, got a little love money, and they want to donate, especially in the climate right now, what are some like organizations or anything, if you have any, that you would recommend?
Oh gosh, that's a good question.
We can
Um,
always add them at the end later if you want to think about it. I can do.
okay, like one off the top of my head. Um, I am on Instagram at theadvocate.slp. So follow me there. And if you're interested in finding out when my podcast drops and more about that, there's a link in my bio to sign up to find out. But that'll be soon. The Unfiltered IEPs podcast, where I'm going to interview people who sit in all chairs at the IEP table, so we can really get a better understanding of each other's perspectives. Um, Additionally, places I would recommend donating. Lily's Voice is a great AAC provider organization that provides AAC for kids or folks who have been either like denied by the school or denied by their insurance. Um, And I'm going to get back to you
Yeah.
on one for immigrants. I mean, I
I
said
put you on the spot. I'm sorry. I usually ask. I
a lot.
forget.
There's this Alliance one in San Diego, but I can't exactly think of the name of it. So look in the show notes, and I will be sure to get Erin the name of an organization I would recommend for um, assistance to our immigrant community.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Erin. I really appreciate the opportunity.